It's hot in here, Jesus.
Hi there. My hair and clothes dry off like I'm in a movie, and I'm gonna be your YouTuber for this video. Anyone who's ever played basketball or any of the other sports, squash, underwater hockey, any classic really, knows that it's exhausting to play. You're sitting out there running back and forth tirelessly. And besides water, the best thing you can usually do to make yourself feel better is cold air. This is because you're tired, you've been running around a lot on the court or the cube, and you need to cool your body off a little bit. See, usually NBA arenas are kept around 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a pretty nice temperature to be in. And let's not act like these guys are raw dogging the court either. They have full spa day retreats when they come into the bench. But there was one night where it wasn't that way. For one game, both teams had to suffer through intense heat in the arena as the air conditioning went completely out. But this wasn't just any game. This was the NBA Finals. Like, the big one. The only thing is, both teams suffering and air conditioning going out may not be the full story. Let me introduce you to one of the greatest conspiracies in NBA history. And before we get you anything about a conspiracy, you need the full story. We gotta travel back in time for a little. We're in Texas in 2014. Obama's president, and our country's in a pretty happy, peaceful time, relatively speaking. And to show how happy we were as a nation, the #1 song? Happy by Pharrell Williams. But on top of all of that, Greg Popovich was still a mastermind super evil genius. The San Antonio Spurs dynasty was coming to an end, but it was not sizzled out quite yet. They made the finals last year, in 2013, but lost to the Miami Heat. But all that was just to end up right back here again the next year with a rematch against that same Heat team. So let's introduce ourselves to this Miami basketball team. It's 2014, but it was 4 years ago when the Heat changed the basketball world forever. In 2010, LeBron James decided to join Miami, departing from Cleveland. But he did it with the help of his superstar buddy joining with him too, and joining up with another one of his superstar buddies in Miami. This wasn't the start of super teams by any means. I mean, the Celtics had just done their whole thing, but I think this was the start of teams actively leaving to join one super team together, and clearly working it out beforehand in deals. And so, LeBron, Wade, and Bosh dominated in Miami, making the finals quickly. They lost to Dallas, but avenged it with back-to-back championships in 2012 and 13, establishing themselves as their own dynasty. The Heat beating the Spurs in 2013 was really sort of a passing of the torch moment to me, though. I mean, the Spurs were this big favorite for the league for so long, and it felt like the Heat were finally starting to overcome their classic style of ball. This came to the chagrin of many NBA fans. Like I mentioned, although they weren't the first super team, fans were not happy about the questionable forming of the Miami Heat's Big Three, and they were therefore a flat-out hated basketball team. I think when a lot of us think back on the Heat's run, we forget that everyone really hated this team at the time. Like, LeBron James was a world villain for leaving Cleveland, and it kind of felt like everyone was rooting for the Heat to lose because it was so obvious they were gonna win. Right? Ring a bell, maybe? I mean, LeBron has changed up his reputation amazingly, but we gotta be aware that this graphic still exists. Yeah. So here we are, ready for a rematch in the 2014 NBA Finals. The burning out older legends against the new kids on the block who are starting to take over. Were the Heat gonna three-peat, or did the Spurs have one last dance in them? Again, it's San Antonio 2014, and it's June 14th. We're just moments away from the tip-off to Game 1 of the Finals. Outside temperatures are around 80 degrees, pretty calm for a summer's day in Texas, but in the AT&T Stadium, it's cooled to a nice 69 degrees. As fans pack the stadium though, the real killer is the 100% humidity, but surely that won't come back to haunt us. 18,000 warm bodies pile in to watch this game, and that doesn't include players, coaches, fans, concession workers, security, and all that. There's a good 20,000 people in this stadium right now. Safe to say, this is a tightly packed arena on a hot, humid Texas night. And so we tip off game 1, with so much at stake, just like last year. And the two teams play pretty good ball for the first half, with the Spurs pulling out to a small 5-point lead at the break. The big three is on full display, but Tim Duncan still leads all scorers with 15 points. The third quarter, though, is all heat. Miami got out and instantly retook the lead, outscoring the Spurs by 9 points in the quarter. LeBron James had 23 points through just 3 quarters, and the Heat were rolling. Up by 4 heading into the fourth quarter, Miami was in the perfect spot to take this game over. But that third quarter, despite being awesome for Miami, is when things started to get real heated. Literally. It's time to put our detective hats on because the conspiracy theory is about to come out. At some point in the third quarter, no one really knows when and no one knows how, but sometime, the air conditioning system in AT&T Stadium, a multi-billion-dollar stadium that serves all sorts of events, failed. And we have such little information despite my best efforts of scavenging every corner of the internet on what exactly happened with this AC malfunction. By now, the Heat had their small lead and the AC had been out for a few minutes. Fans were starting to notice the heat, visibly fanning themselves and feeling the body heat from 18,000 plus people all at once. But no one suffered from the heat worse than, well, the Heat did. Okay, I'll stop. Around this time, a PA system announcement went out over the whole stadium. And this announcement is one of our best and only pieces of evidence for this AC malfunction. The PA system read aloud, "An electrical failure for the power that runs the AC system in the AT&T Center has occurred. We are continuing to work on resolving the problem. We apologize for any inconvenience." Now you want to pay close attention to the words electrical failure for the power, but we'll come back to this later. After this announcement, the third quarter shortly came to an end, and despite their work on dissolving the problem, the AC was still off. And I'll just come out and say now, for the entire rest of this basketball game, although it may have clicked on a couple times, the AC would never be restored fully, and it would have a giant impact on the game. TV broadcasts couldn't ignore the absolute misery that fans were going through in the stadiums as temperatures reached above 90 degrees inside. But of course, the players were the ones really going through it, forced into quicker substitutions and going through hell on the bench when they sat down. It's just an interesting little thing to take note of. The Spurs players almost seemed unbothered by these high temperatures sometimes. This showed up on the court too, as the Spurs clawed their way back into the game and kept it close. But right around now is when the tide would turn the biggest it had the entire game. And of course, it was because of the heat. Miami star LeBron James had already had to take a lot of extra substituting time for cramps and heat-related things, but during this fourth quarter, he was rendered completely useless. And this is a funny one because I bet a lot of you guys have never had a sports cramp right now. We're like, what? Why couldn't he play through a cramp? Like, he could have done that. But no, you can't. Like, I don't care if it's the NBA Finals or if it's a YMCA game. If you have an actual cramp, man, you're going down. There's no control over it. A mid-sports game cramp will truly have you rethinking your decision to ever, step foot outside. So we don't need to see any hate on LeBron for this one. But no matter how it was, LeBron was out of the game. He tried to re-enter a couple times, but his body kind of just rejected physically on him. And with 4 minutes left to play, he was done for the entire night. The best player on the planet was completely unplayable at the end of an NBA Finals game because of these 90-degree plus temperatures in the arena. The Spurs used LeBron's absence to their advantage and completely took over. They went on a 31-9 run to end the game, including a 16-3 run while LeBron left. Tim Duncan played a classic Tim Duncan game, shooting the lights out, and the Spurs took game 1, 110-95. So you have the story, and the conspiracy is pretty clear in it. I've given you an unbiased, kind of normal account of what happened that night, but it's time for us to start really digging in. Let's start with this air conditioner itself. The AC unit in AT&T Stadium is a state-of-the-art, enormous 11,000-ton cooling system that heats fans and players from below the stadium. It was installed by TD Ameritrade Industries, and it had no other known issues like this one in its 5-year history. But when we look a little closer at that PA announcement the stadium made towards the end of the third quarter, we get some insight into what actually happened. An electrical failure for the power that ran the AC system in the AT&T Center occurred, which tells us that it wasn't an AC error like commonly reported. It was a power error. The power connecting to the air conditioning system is what turned off, not the AC itself. This means either a fuse was blown or someone pulled that plug intentionally. So let's look at all reasons and evidence that Spurs head coach Greg Popovich actually could have had that plug pulled. I put together a list of 4 solid reasons that this could have been intentional, and it's time to explore these. And first on the list is bad blood. Miami and San Antonio was no normal finals matchup, and there were plenty of feelings between the teams that extended from long ago. I told you that the Heat had beat the Spurs the year prior, but we didn't get too deep into how they did it. This heart-wrenching series saw San Antonio take a 3-2 game lead and come seconds away from closing out the game. But instead, Ray Allen hit the greatest shot in NBA history. The Heat came back to win Game 7, and the Spurs watched their windows start to fade away. Possibility was really running out of time for San Antonio, who barely even had a shot at one last ring, and they needed all the help they can get. So, in a pivotal Game 1 against Miami, isn't it logical that Greg Popovich would take out all the stops and make the air conditioning system fail to get whatever advantage he could? I mean, honestly, if anyone would do it, I think it'd be him. But let's continue on with the evidence. Next, we look at motive, which pretty much represents itself to us for the Spurs. The team needs a win and a huge Game 1 that sets the stage for the rest of the series. Coming out and smacking Miami could make this the very most important game of the series, and they'll take any advantage for that. But this piece of the conspiracy also extends up past the Spurs to the NBA front office level. In 2014, Adam Silver stepped into the role as NBA commissioner, taking over for David Stern. Silver's built himself a pretty solid reputation, thanks in large part to not being involved in numerous conspiracy theories like Stern was. But I think that in the transition period from Silver to Stern, this could have been one last naughty thing that David Stern was able to get pushed through. Why would the NBA do this? Why would they knowingly cut the cord to the AC in the finals? Well, we again can't forget just how hated LeBron James and the Miami Heat were by everyone. They already had their 2 rings, and now the NBA could feed into what the public wants by sabotaging them and seeing a Miami Heat loss in the finals. It would also hopefully break up their big 3 and prevent players from doing similar super teamy things in the future.
Which obviously it did not.
So just maybe, the NBA was all in on this one too. My third reason that the Spurs could have actually rigged this game is the advantage that nobody knew they had. You've probably been visibly upset and crying this whole video because you're saying to yourself, how does the AC only help the Spurs? They both have to play in the Heat. Well, remember when I said it seemed like Spurs players were almost less affected? Yeah, that's because they were. The Spurs' Big 3 is known to be comprised of all foreign players, with Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili. And these 3 locations of where they were all born and where they grew up actually plays a huge factor in this conspiracy and could be the whole reason it happened. Somehow, this team was accidentally assembled to be a super team when it came to ultra-hot weather games. Manu Ginobili grew up playing in Argentina with large box gyms that don't even have AC. This man felt nothing but a normal basketball game from his childhood. And Tony Parker played with these exact same experiences in Belgium, again using European gyms that didn't have AC almost his entire youth. These guys were used to this. But Tim Duncan, who grew up in the most humid place imaginable and has also likely played games with no AC, actually was a little bothered. Despite his prior experience in these games, this one was still too much and it made him really uncomfortable. So, I'm sure he had a really bad game because of that. Okay. So yeah, the Spurs were completely fine through hot weather, or they at least played really well in it. And if that's not enough weird proof for you, Boris Diaw also played professionally in Europe for a long time. Oh, and Danny Green? Yeah, he does his wind sprints in 100-degree temperatures.
Guys, that Danny Green article was 3 years before the finals. This can't be a coincidence. Popovich is a supervillain. He has to be.
So obviously, going after the AC could have actually been a genius maneuver and one of the only things the Spurs could do that would affect Miami and not affect them. You look at LeBron James and how much he suffered. The greatest player on the planet was restricted to the bench. I don't want to believe it, but... So, alongside their advantage, the last piece of evidence I could find that the Spurs really rigged this game is by digging into their past. We know San Antonio was a mighty, consistent, and fundamental team for the last 960 years, but there's an undoubtable dark gloom that hangs over their franchise. They're the closest thing to the Patriots in basketball for me. Maybe not so much on the cheating side, but with the strict army-like routine and rules you have to follow. I feel like the Spurs locker room's such a no-fun zone, and I truly don't understand how Kawhi Leonard would exist otherwise. We even saw a guy like DeJounte Murray recently leave the Spurs and seem to gain this personality and have fun on the court again. There's just something going on in San Antonio that brings an evil darkness over people, I think. And maybe it does have something to do with cheating too. The Spurs have often gone above and beyond and tried to psych opponents out either before or after the game, especially when they're playing at home. Former NBA player Jason Terry gave his experiences into what San Antonio can do to get in your head. On one experience, Terry alleges that the visitors' locker room in San Antonio were cold water only showers and had an infestation of fleas in them. Earlier in this same 2014 season too, Terry recounts seeing a live snake being present in their locker room. So yeah, the Spurs have gone out of their way to make opponents feel really uncomfortable using snakes and cold showers and maybe, possibly, air conditioning. It really sounds like a big stretch to turn the AC off in a game, but when you put it next to snakes and cold showers, it's a lot less of a stretch. Just saying, man, this is very possible. And you now have all the information that I have, and it's your turn to make your own informed theory on this conspiracy. Do you think it's actually possible that the San Antonio Spurs turned off their air conditioning and took advantage of something they knew they could? Or is this crazy and am I going to get like a Alex Jones type conspiracy rap now? Boy, I hope not. So what do you guys think? Please tell me down below, and that's about all I got for you today. If this is all true though, it did work out for the Spurs. They went on to win this final series in 5 games after taking the all-important Game 1. I do want to leave with one more piece of information on this theory though. This AT&T Stadium's the same place where the Dallas Cowboys hold, where they bring in 80,000 fans, use way more power, way more energy, but have the same AC system. And amazingly, in the 111 home Cowboy football games that have been there, or the tons of other events and concerts that have taken place, this is the only air conditioning failure at AT&T Stadium ever reported. The one time where it would have been of huge importance and given one team a huge advantage is the one time where it went out. Just some food for thought.